Hello, and welcome to the Quantum Fit Podcast. I'm Taylor, and I am your host. This podcast is all about applying the different principles of quantum physics and quantum biology to your health and fitness. This gives us a holistic view of how different environmental factors, such as sunlight or cold, play a major role in your overall health. So I won't just be talking about diet or exercise and developing good habits. If you want to really make lasting changes in how you feel, think, and act, then I'd recommend you try to listen closely and have an open mind to what I have to say. Every day I'll be hitting you with a quick 7 to 15 minute long podcast. I keep it short like this because it makes it both informative and to the point so that you don't feel quite so overwhelmed with information. Also, currently I do not do any kind of advertisements. So instead, I ask that you share this podcast with a friend or family member if you enjoyed the message and gained something from it. I want to be able to spread quality and easy to understand content that everyone can take and use in their own daily lives. I would highly appreciate it. On to today's episode, Fat in the Bloodstream. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about, contrary to what is often said, fat levels in the bloodstream are not something you should always worry about. We'll get into it more shortly, but the only time you really need to worry about it is if you have high levels of fat in the blood and you also have high levels of inflammation, as shown by high levels of C-reactive protein on a blood test. All right. First of all, we need to understand that cholesterol is created within the liver from food, and it will also, repurpose cholesterol that's eaten from animal products, such as shrimp. Shrimp have a lot of cholesterol, surprisingly. So cholesterol, it's just a delivery package of fuel from the liver to other tissues in the body, at least initially. It can be burned or used in the building of other biochemicals or cellular structures. This means that if you have more heavily damaged tissues and cells, you need more cholesterol, not less. For instance, high cholesterol levels correlates with significantly better outcomes for elderly and those going into chemo. So, so for people that have serious diseases or, something that's like cancer or things that are highly inflammatory, whatever disease it is, that means you're going to be having lots of cellular damage going on, and cholesterol is what's going to rebuild everything that's in those cells. So cutting it out of the diet is not a good idea, trying to chase the cholesterol, because the cholesterol itself, overall, that's not the problem. Again, it's just fuel. It basically becomes, it's a form of moving energy. That's all it is. And then again, it rebuilds things, so anyway, the main point is, if you know anybody that does avoid cholesterol, they need to listen to this episode so they can, understand that they're probably hurting themselves in the long run. Again, especially if they're elderly. So once cholesterol reaches a tissue, insulin tells the cells to accept the package. This is where leptin sensitivity plays a massive role. Becoming leptin resistant means you will eventually become insulin resistant, as I've talked about before, which, this is going to make it really hard to get cells to accept any macronutrients, or to accept them correctly anyway. Also, like I talked about in episode 33, if you're leptin sensitive, muscle and brown fat are able to use uncoupling proteins to burn through all leftover fuel with ease. Seriously, 100% of the fuel will actually be used up. But if you're not sensitive to leptin, then you'll have another dilemma entirely. Unused fuel will get shipped back to the liver. Although, it should be noted that there is a good amount of cholesterol that will, just end up floating in your bloodstream. Might not be actively being used, but it's there as a substrate, So it's kind of dealing with on-demand needs, if that makes sense. The liver's letting it out over time, just for, whenever tissues need it. But anyways, this is where mayhem can happen. This is where the major problems happen, is with that unused fuel getting back to the liver. Either this cholesterol will stay in the liver and build over time, which is what leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver at later stages of insulin resistance, or the cholesterol will be repackaged and sent off to adipose tissue for storage, your white fat. Excess glucose will go through the same process. It too will come through the liver, and then it'll get, repackaged as cholesterol. The big problem comes from the repackaging. Cholesterol in the blood can take many different forms, but we're most concerned in this episode with LDL, or low-density lipoproteins. These are often labeled as really scary fats in the blood, but that simply isn't always the case, because, there's a few different kinds and you can have different amounts of them. Intermediate and large fluffy LDL are made they're made when we eat foods high in fat and protein. So, especially animal sources, but, coconut, avocado, you'll get the same effect. These forms of cholesterol aren't able to really do any damage in the body, so you want to see mostly these on a blood test. Small, dense LDL are the really dangerous forms that can stick in the walls of blood vessels thanks to their, stickiness and extremely small size. They also oxidize very easily and will readily cause damage to other tissues. Again, things that oxidize, basically it's going to end up creating free radicals or reactive oxygen species. Take your pick. They're all basically the same thing. Now, these small, dense LDL are formed from eating carbohydrates, especially fructose. Those of you consistently listening, do you see this trend of fructose being extremely bad for you yet? Finally, leptin resistance down-regulates LDL receptors in the liver. The liver begins to stop accepting as much LDL, which, if the LDL, the cholesterol in your blood, isn't allowed to go back into the liver to then be told to go out into, because again, the liver has to repackage it. It has to then send it out and direct it to where it's supposed to go. Well, if the liver is not taking in as much, it's just, refusing to, you're going to have LDL that's forced to basically stay in limbo within the blood. This is directly how cholesterol levels are able to drive higher and higher and higher and higher. It's because it's not because of insulin resistance per se. It's actually directly because of leptin resistance, because those LDL receptors are just, dropping. They're just disappearing from the liver. Well, applying some logic, this is all, all this is why a lot of low-carb people are unable to lose fat, by the way. They may not store fat quite as much because they're taking in less carbs and pretty much no fructose in most cases. They also have generally much higher insulin sensitivity. And again, so combined, you're not going to store as much fat. But they are still leptin resistant, which makes it basically impossible to lose fat. There is a caveat, of course, like with anything. You can lose fat really, really fast no matter what by not eating anything, go into starvation mode, but I mean, you're going to lose muscle and you're going to have hormonal problems and everything else if you do that long term. But then, the other way is cardio, excess exercise. But that's going to deplete stem cells and increases the heteroplasmy rate of mitochondria. Increases the chance of getting mutations, and overall, long term, it'll shorten your life expectancy. Which is why you need to lose fat while being leptin sensitive. It's the only way to do it while ensuring your health. Also interesting to note that those on a carnivore style diet have ludicrous blood panels. Seriously. It's like crazy high amounts of cholesterol and LDL in the blood are very commonly found. But the LDL is almost entirely made up of large, fluffy variety. Again, animal products. Most people would see this as being a serious problem, but the theory goes that it's simply a sign of the body being switched over to predominantly using fats for fuel. Well, basically almost only using fats for fuel. So it keeps them circulating for usage as needed, and the fats are easily dealt with by antioxidants if they become problematic. And I'm having trouble with it because it seems kind of interesting when you really dive into the science of it, because it's that whole leptin resistance issue. Everyone who goes carnivore, for the most part, is able to reverse basically every disease. Besides like cancers and neurodegenerative diseases that are far progressed, besides those. So either way, it should mean that they have high leptin sensitivity and if you have high leptin sensitivity, you should have lots of LDL receptors in the liver to pick up LDL from the bloodstream. Yet they still have high LDL in their blood. So it's an interesting conundrum, at the very least. I'm guessing it's one of two things. Either all these people are actually still leptin resistant, there's some weird biochemistry going on that's allowing them to just bypass the leptin sensitivity, or it's just something else entirely that nobody fully understands yet. So it'd be kind of interesting. I'll see if I can dig into that more and find a true answer to it, because as of right now, it's a pretty interesting thing to actually think about. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Learn a little bit about how cholesterol actually works in the blood, and why people's levels drive up and everything. If you have any questions and comments, you can find me on Instagram at RealQuantumFit, the Quantum Fit Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, Taylor Kelson, or through a voice message across the Anchor app. See ya!